is Joshua Ray Stevens. I do comics. I'm trained as a graphic designer. I went to undergrad for graphic design, and then I studied in Italy for a year as a graphic designer, and I then also went to grad school for graphic design. And basically in my second year, in the summer between my first and second year in grad school, I literally was meditating on my roof and had an enlightenment that comics was what I always wanted to do. I think I'm attracted to a kind of heroic narratives, you know? I was always into the Greek mythology whenever I was young and things like that. And I also have a really, really strong attraction towards comedy, and it seems like comics is kind of that perfect visual medium that it can simultaneously be kind of epic, fantastic, heroic, but it also, just by its nature, just by the way that it's drawn, there's a kind of absurdity to it, you know? There's something that's, I think, almost always silly about comics, which is, I think, really works for me in the kind of, you know, that was what attracted me to it, I think, but I wouldn't have been able to articulate that, but in the kind of reflection on it, I realized that comics is perfect for me because every time I start to feel like I'm taking myself over seriously, I look around and I'm like, you're drawing comics. You know, I definitely find myself, and often this is when I think the work is at its best, is I will find myself working on something and just kind of uncontrollably bursting into laughter, you know? Like, oh yeah, this is good, this is good. I know something is good if that happens to me, you know? It's not the only barometer, of course, but when that happens, I feel like, okay, I'm onto something here. I'm striving to culture myself. I want to be a true cosmopolitan, you know? So I'm always looking inside and outside. You know, it depends kind of on the time of my life at the moment. You know, there are people right now that I'm more interested in than others, but you know, I have influences from Japan, from Italy, from France, from Holland, from Russia. Not so much in comics for Russia, actually, but Russia doesn't really have that much for comics, but you know, Japan obviously is just I visited there in '06 and I felt like, wow, this is home, you know? I express myself visually, but I am very much a mythic narrative mind, you know? I want meaning, you know, narrative meaning, mythic meaning, and so comics just seems like the perfect, you know, I want to write and tell stories, but I don't want it to just be words for me in particular, you know, even though of course I read tons of straight literature, which is another, you know, it's another thing getting to the question of inspiration. I mean, it's difficult because I'm just as inspired by Nietzsche or Dostoevsky as I am by you know, Frank Frazetta or Mobius, you know? Really anything you work in has some sort of limit, really. You know what I mean? Like, even if you're working on mural scale, you still only have the space of the wall you're working on, or, you know, for me, limits are important, you know, because in a certain sense they give you traction, and I think in a lot of ways in modernity our kind of fetish for lack of limitation is really more of a detriment than anything else almost, you know? It's like we want to believe that we have no limits, but really you always do. If you're lying to yourself and saying, oh, I can do whatever I want, then from my perspective it's kind of like all you're really doing is living in a kind of state of going back to idiots, you're living in this kind of idiotistic world, you know, where you are convincing yourself of things that aren't actually true, you know? Because it's just not the case. There is no thing that you can work on that is truly unlimited, you know? Even if you could, let's say you could get rid of space somehow. how would you do that? I don't know. But even then, you're limited by your span of life, right? Ultimately. This guy's name is Nick Nick, and you can't see him because he's in pencil here, but his brother's name is Thorsten, and they're kind of my favorites right now because they look silly and they're really kind of adventurous and funny and also philosophical. And then I think one of my other favorites, his name is Fred Blitzkrieg, and he's like a cartoon version of Nietzsche in a way, you know, but intentionally cartoon. Like, I'm not trying to actually make him like Nietzsche is just kind of a jumping off point, but he's the guy over there that's the blacksmith, you know. So he's got that big Nietzsche mustache and that kind of flipped over hair, but he's also one of my favorites because he's very audacious. They're all come from either personages that are historical, that I dream of conversations I would like to have with those people, you know, or they come from people that I know. Like the two characters, Thorsten and Nick Nick, they're basically, one of them is essentially based on my brother, and the other is essentially based on my best friend. And then that would be, Thorsten is the one on my best friend, and he would be kind of the left-brained, very active, very kind of forceful. He's kind of like the yang, you know. And the other one is kind of more right-brained yin, kind of not, you know, passive, but in that way that water is passive, that it still can kind of corrode anything around it. You know, he receives and he can kind of go with the flow. And then the way I balance them out is that they're both also partly me, of course, you know. So you know, in their arguments and conversations, they often are the kind of arguments that I have with my brother and my, I will be thinking of past conversations and just, you know, going over how I would have argued it if I had had the time to think about it and things like that, you know. I loved Red Hook immediately. When my wife, my girlfriend at the time, when we came to visit to see this place, we just, as soon as we pulled up, we were like, oh, that building is great. You have the kind of contemporary urbanites basically, and then you have some kind of like older former maritime people, and then you also have the kind of industrial wasteland that it has become because most of the industry has left. So you have all these big, beautiful, empty warehouses and things like that. So I think it's actually what I like about Red Hook is kind of the same thing I love about Mexico City. Mexico City is one of my favorite places in the world for the same reason, because it's such an interesting collision of high and low, you know, rich and poor, high tech and low tech, you know. It's just a nice kind of, I see like a kind of crisis point in a way, and I just love that. Because I guess with any crisis, you know, crisis is always defined as, I mean, we say it as if it's a bad thing, you know, like when people break up with their boyfriends or girlfriends, or when people are going through some sort of psychological depression or something, they say, I'm in crisis, and they mean I'm having a rough go of it. But crisis is actually, from my understanding, it's that transition point where, you know, you get something is changing and changing, and it gets to this point where it could go either way, you know, it could go good or it could go bad, and crisis is that moment right when it's about to decide, and I feel like Red Hook is kind of that right now.